When Jedi Fallen Order first released, I initially wasn't terribly interested in it. I had run out of titles to play, however, and decided to pick it up just to give it a shot. After all, The Mandalorian had just launched on Disney Plus, and hype towards the release of Rise of Skywalker next month is starting to reach a fever pitch. Why not fully immerse myself in Star Wars mania? The first thing I noticed about Fallen Order when I booted it up was that it looks pretty awesome. Nothing earth-shattering, but character models and animation and a lot of the scenery looks really good. I'm playing this on a PlayStation 4, so I'm sure that the PC version on a top-end machine looks even better, but with what I have, it looks good. I was able to play the game from start to finish without even suffering a single crash or really any other weird anomalies, which I found suspicious of the Frostbite engine that EA had mandated its studios to develop on. Until I came to realize that actually Fallen Order wasn't developed on Frostbite. This bad boy is running on Unreal Engine. As it turns out, the game's developers, Respawn Entertainment, started development on Fallen Order prior to the studio's acquisition by EA. Respawn co-founder Vince Zampella explained in an interview with Game Informer that the studio didn't even have access to Frostbite at the game's inception, so it wasn't an option. Oh, if only that were the case for some other Frostbite games. So the game looks great. How does it play, you ask? Well, in a prior video on the Nerdcast, I described a scene to Justin about an encounter on a train with a lightsaber. I described it as a pretty awesome RPG-type encounter that I hoped was going to be emblematic of the rest of the game. Well, it turns out I was way off. It was a very well-done tutorial element, but a tutorial element was all it was. The game itself is, as it has been described in many other media outlets, a marriage of Uncharted and Dark Souls. The game will have you navigating lots of treacherous terrain using a number of platforming and acrobatic techniques, such as wall running, double jumping, vine swinging, wall climbing, and a few other things. Lots of environmental puzzles will be centered around figuring out how to overcome obstacles using these techniques, and some solutions can get pretty complex. Luckily, the game's controls are fairly solid, at least in the exploratory phases. I had some annoyances during combat, but I'll get to that later. One weird part about Fallen Order is that you don't start off having access to your full complement of exploratory feats, or even just some of the basic ones. As you progress in the game, you will reach areas where a flashback will bring up a story mode tutorial unlocking an ability here and there. It's kind of weird. It's like the player character remembers how to deflect blaster bolts with a lightsaber or slow someone using the Force, but somehow forgot how to wall run or double jump. This can be pretty tedious and annoying initially, but it's actually expressed through the game's story pretty effectively. You see, you don't have access to a lot of these abilities because the character's connection to the Force has been largely severed by a traumatic experience. As you progress in the story, his connection to the Force heals, and those abilities open up. It's a really cool way to see the physical manifestation of a character's emotional growth, and kind of makes it feel like you're actually improving as a Jedi, more so than the vague leveling up system, which honestly I think the game could have completely done away with. So, that was the Uncharted aspect of the game, but what about the Dark Souls aspect? How is combat? In 2 words, fluid but frustrating. I'm not counting but as a word there. You guys got to keep in mind, I'm coming off about a solid year of Witcher 3 binging, so I've got very high expectations of my combat systems. Fallen Order honestly isn't too far off from Witcher 3, but it feels maybe a bit too loose and delayed, which is very Dark Souls. When I press a button to attack, it feels like it takes a solid second and a half before the attack fully manifests itself. It was my chief complaint with Dark Souls that it fares little better for me here. Dodging in the game was a slipshod affair for me. Sometimes I would dive out of the way of the attack, other times I would do a little side hop. These 2 dodge mechanics are present in Witcher 3, but are accomplished by pressing 2 different buttons. Here in Fallen Order, it's the same button. This means that when I desperately need to dive out of the way from a big attack, I might instead do a side hop and get whacked. This brought no end to frustrations with me. The strong and weak attacks worked fine as expected, and being able to use the Force mid-combat to do things like freeze enemies or pull them towards you and impale them with your lightsaber or push them off a cliff is fun and awesome, but without solid dodge mechanics, it's way too easy to get overwhelmed and pummeled in this game if you're playing in any mode that isn't story mode. Enemies can surround you and overwhelm you, though you can obtain a double-ended lightsaber for crowd control. Enemies with ranged attacks who attack while you're being overwhelmed by melee enemies is the absolute worst, though. Combat will require some thought and strategy, as it's evident that the character is largely just a Padawan throughout the game. But if you are overcome by the urge to feel like a full-fledged Jedi Master and want to just annihilate anyone and everyone with your lightsaber, then story mode is the mode you want to play on. And just how exactly is the story in Fallen Order? Well, I would have to say that, and honestly, for me at least, it's the weakest aspect of the game, although it does have its moments. The game introduces you to its protagonist, Cal Kestis, in a compelling enough manner. Once you get past the opening brunt of tutorials, however, the game reverts to some standard, i.e. dull and predictable Star Wars fare, with plot devices that push the story forward coming few and far between the adventuring moments. You see, Cal is a Jedi Padawan who escaped Order 66 and survived some number of years as a scrapper on Braca. When an accident forced him to use the Force to save his friend from coworker, he inadvertently outed himself to the Empire and brought an Inquisitor to Braca in search of him. During his harrowing escape, he was rescued by Siri Junda and Grizz. I think her name is pronounced Siri, I can't remember. Without giving away more in the story, I will say that it's not without its moments of intrigue and suspense, and maybe even something that might constitute a plot twist. But ultimately, I found that I was not entirely interested in any of the characters or their motivations. Cal is a fine enough character, though my initial first impression of him was that he seemed like he would have been an early 90s sitcom neighbor more than a Jedi protagonist. I warmed up to his chivalric, almost altruistic attitude towards the Jedi-Sith dichotomy and his commitment to Ciri's mission. After all, we don't really need another grizzled anti-hero, do we? And towards the end of the game, I even found him to be something approaching charming. Ultimately, at the end of it all, I'm not exactly itching for more stories starring Cal Kestis or anyone else from the Fallen Order. It's a fine story for the game is trying to sell, and I think that's about all it really needs to be. In the end, what do I think of Jedi Fallen Order as a whole? Do I recommend it? Well, if I had to grade it on a 10 scale, I'd give it about a 7.5. But let me add some context to that. The two titles most closely associated with Fallen Order are Dark Souls and Uncharted, two types of games that I don't really have a great deal of affinity for personally. Uncharted is fine, but I was never really enthralled with, the non-RPG adventure games. I tend to lose interest pretty quickly, honestly. I have a love-hate relationship with Dark Souls that mostly borders on hate. I was never a fan of absurd difficulty as a genre, and I was less impressed by the fact that difficulty in those games can largely be overcome by level grinding, meaning the difficulty was less a function of mechanics design and more a function of radical imbalance and power disparities between the player and enemies. It would be like, if I played The Witcher 3 and only played it on Nightmare mode, and I couldn't equip any swords and just had to go around punching everyone. That would make the game super difficult, but would it be fun? For me, Dark Souls wasn't really that fun. But Jedi Fallen Order isn't quite that brutal. It can get really frustrating at times, especially due to the aforementioned dodging issues that I was having. But hey, that's just me. I still think the game was pretty fun overall, and is worth playing. If you're like me, and like but not maybe love Star Wars, but you love Dark Souls or you love Uncharted, you really can't go wrong with this game. I would say you may want to give this one a shot. If you maybe love Star Wars, but you're not a big fan of Dark Souls or Uncharted, I still say give this game a shot, though you may want to wait for it to go on sale. Whenever you do pick it up, you definitely want to play it on story mode. If you love Star Wars and you love Dark Souls and you love Uncharted, well, what are you doing watching this video? You probably already conquered the game, so what the hell did you watch all this for?